Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Mission YouTube page. Today we have Brady, who is a professor of Catholic social teaching at St. Thomas University. And for our this episode will be geared toward faith formation professionals and how you implement Catholic social teaching in a faith formation setting. So first, I want to give a brief introduction to Brady from my own experience. I really appreciated our first conversation when I was at St. Thomas. You were very welcoming in terms of making sure I got to the right place. And you've been very enthusiastic about the mission of Catholic social teaching in our archdiocese. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you for agreeing to be with us here today. Is there anything else you want to say to introduce yourself? Tell us about how did you come to build your career around Catholic social teaching? That's really kind of it's interesting. There's not many people that do that. And I'm really curious how you came to that decision.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Adam. I appreciate it. And thanks for that question. I was expecting more of something significant about Catholic social teaching, but how did I figure it out? Well, I suppose it was a class I had in graduate school on Catholic social teaching that I've come to really appreciate it and make it part of my life. And I'm kind of thinking it right now as a friendship, in that was an important moment, and I've studied it and taught it, read people talking about it, and I've really come to love it. I suppose that the way I was raised as a Catholic and brought up to care about other people in the broader community made me open and interested originally to the idea. But that was the time I jumped in. And what did I find interesting about it, catchy about it? What I liked about it is, well, Saint John Paul II describes it as the crossroads where Christian faith meets the real world. And that's what I like about it. It brings the tradition to bear upon, and then invites us to apply the tradition to respond to our particular context.
Yeah.
I like it for that. I like it because it doesn't provide bumper sticker answers to complex moral questions. It invites us to think. It doesn't give us marching directions so much as ideas to think about, to incorporate, and in all of that, it pushes the moral agency, the moral activity of persons, the moral responsibility of individuals and institutions to address social issues.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing I've appreciated most as I've thought about my years of being interested in Catholic social teaching is just this aspect of critical thinking, is that there are no cookie cutter answers to a lot of the world's social problems. And this forum gives us an avenue for discernment where we can balance many different sets of principles. Right. It's an example of moral theology done really well and how Catholic social teaching has been constructed. So there's just a lot that I appreciate on that, especially as I've seen over time the dangers of what happens when you don't have a faith practice that encourages critical thinking.
Right.
And so this is a nice avenue where you can have that aspect of critical thinking. So for those of us who might not be familiar with Catholic social teaching, can you give us a brief description of the history of Catholic social teaching?
Sure.
And what parts fascinate you most as you think about the tradition?
Yeah, that's good. So the birth date of Catholic social teaching is usually given to 1891, when Pope Leo XIII issued this encyclical called Rerum Novarum. Encyclical is a circular letter to be passed around to the bishops and priests and to all the laity. The title of it was Rerum Novarum, about new things. And Leo wasn't really happy about the new things. I don't think he thought he was starting a new tradition when he wrote this, because he's relying on biblical theology. He's relying on theologians and philosophers who came before him. There's a lot of St. Thomas Aquinas in there about justice and about law, about the nature of society. But he, in writing this encyclical, was responding to revolutionary times. So The direct revolution that he was responding to was the Industrial Revolution that swept through parts of Europe, and then the consequences of that. And some bishops were asking him, "Can you say something? Can you give us teaching on this?" So that was like the initial revolution, but it's also in a way responding to the political revolution, the French Revolution, and later, earlier on, is the American Revolution that changed the way we think about the social ordering of people and communities and families, and indeed the workplace. His insight, or he built on the traditional Catholic responses, say, to the issue of poverty, and his issue was that people were working very hard all the time. Think of a time before we had workers' rights laws. Think of a time before we had 40-hour work week or child labor laws or these sorts of things, workman's compensation, social insurance, these things, vacations. They were working very hard all the time, and they were poor, right? So he realized, and this was his insight, and this is why we tap this as the birth date. He realized that there's human choice around our social practices and social systems. They're not just God-given that we have to deal with and work within. There's human choice. And if there's human choice, we can change it. We can address these questions. So certainly he called for personal acts of charity to the poor, certainly called for Catholic institutions and the church to develop institutions to care for the poor themselves. But he also says we have to look at the patterns of social, how people are paid, what they're paid, what does the workplace look like, and how can we address those questions? So that is the beginning of the birth of Catholic social teaching, and you might call it almost like business ethics or workplace ethics, and then it developed from there. I suppose the next big event that challenged the church and the popes to think about the social order was World War II, World War I, and then World War II, and the mass destruction and destructive weapons, the Holocaust, right in their backyard, right? Yeah. World War II is right in their backyard. So with that, as people, narrators say, the social question became worldwide and global. And we have the encyclical Pacem in Terris by Pope John the 23rd in response to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world thought we were on the brink of nuclear war. And it just has expanded since then.
How do you, because Catholic social teaching talks about so many challenging topics, how do you approach Catholic social teaching in a way that you would for like kids? Like you work with college students primarily. How do you make the topics of Catholic social teaching seem less scary so that it's palatable for the response?
That's a good question, because in teaching, the 2 laws of teaching: know your stuff and know who you're stuffing, right? So we would teach adults different than we would teach children on this. I think the list of principles are very helpful. So sometime in the 80s or 90s, the US bishops decided, we got like 3 inches thick of documents, very small print. How do we make this stuff accessible? So they had a committee and they came up with these principles. And sometimes you see 7 and sometimes you see 10. But I think, and I've seen them in Catholic schools and, Catholic Social Teaching Week, where they take one a day. I think this was a genius move. This is a great idea. For long term, I think we need more than just principles. But for kids, I think they can wrap their mind around the idea that, number one, everybody has a certain dignity. We have to treat everybody with respect, and not only respect, but give them what they need to help them flourish, right? And I know they know the idea also of it sounds abstract and hard, but the common good. They know they have to do certain things in the classroom. There are certain things expected of them, certain things at home. Maybe they have chores, right? Things they have to do that help the family run well and the classroom run well. So I think the ideas can be communicated in basic ways to kids.
Good. Yeah, and I think rights and responsibilities is something students run into in classroom settings too, where they're like, okay, there are these certain things that you have to do as a student, and there's
Right,
certain ways that we have to behave, but there's also expectations that, yes, here is I as your teacher, I will come prepared every day. So,
right, right. I think they wouldn't use those words, but you're absolutely right to say they know them,
yep.
right? They know they have certain responsibilities, homework, right, to sit down, to be quiet at certain times. Maybe they have a task to do for,
No.
collect papers, whatever. And they also know that there's a certain amount of expectation that students, we can expect of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like it's like in the summers, I will often see in my basement the little square rug that Olivia has for her preschoolers, and that square rug is like individually marked so that each kid goes to an individual diamond and sits on it, and
Uh-huh.
it's like, oh well, yeah, it's something that we have to do to help build a stable community, because really Catholic social teaching is about the common good at its
Yes.
core.
And the common good is creating conditions that enable people to flourish. And that's exactly what those diamonds give them the space to do well. Yeah.
Yeah, great. What are some practical ways in which your study of Catholic social teaching has affected your faith and your actions in the world?
Um, I always go back to this famous um, part of Catholic morality: see, judge, and act. Uh, it's found in the social encyclical, John the 23rd, and it talks about the see, judge, and act. It comes out of St. Thomas Aquinas when he talks about the virtue of prudence, how to make a good decision. Um, and these steps that all of us take when we're trying to make when we have a decision that takes some time, a big life decision. See, analyze, judge, and then what kind of action do I want to do? One of the things that Catholic social teaching has done for me, and I think it does for everybody who thinks about it, is influence the way they see the world. It influences the way they see the world. So if you if you really think that every person has a basic dignity, if you really think that, so not just me and my family, people who look like me, people act like me, people who drive like me, but everybody has this basic dignity. Um, that changes the way you look at the world. That changes the way you interact with the world. If you think we're uh, one of our tasks on earth here is to promote the common good in the communities that we live in, uh, that changes your outlook on things. Um, now, certainly, in both these ways, it's debatable how we are to do these, but it changes. If you think that we ought to be, from Catholic social teaching, peacemakers, right? Work on just solutions to problems and prefer nonviolent methods. That changes how you deal with conflict. If you believe that we have an obligation to care for the earth, that has you look at the earth differently, right?
Yeah.
So it helps me, it helps us see, make some judgments, uh, um, and then one thing about Catholic social teaching is like I said, and you had already talked about it, inspires individuals to make choices of action in their particular context. And I mean, I think quite frankly, people are more comfortable or called to respond in some ways that others um, are not. Not all of us could be those people who work at the Dorothy Day homeless shelter downtown
Right.
and meet those people every day, have them come in, feed them, make sure they're safe, send them out day after day after day, right? It takes a certain kind of person to do that. Um, but we can care about homeless people in different ways. We can care about providing homes, or making sure that there are affordable homes and housing for people. And that's a different level of care. Um, so I think Catholic social teaching invites us to and challenges us to think about, where do we fit in? What are we going to do?
And how do we come up with creative solutions if we don't feel like we fit in anywhere in the puzzle, and in particular for how we solve a particular social problem, because it is calling us to be involved.
Right, right. And I mentioned the Dorothy Day Center. I like to take my students down there during the semester, but there's other issues,
Yeah.
and I think we're certainly right and just. Maybe if we are more interested in one issue than the other, because we can't cover them all.
No, I always think of the image of Gumby, and that even with Gumby, there's only so far the clay model can stretch before it
Right,
would just
right,
break.
right.
And
I,
so
I,
that
yeah,
so we all have preferences and ideas based on our call, and based on our reading of Catholic social teaching, and based on what touches our own hearts when we are engaging with the world around us.
right, right. I mean, like many people, I'm sure you get phone calls, not so much phone calls anymore, but you get mailings for, if you give to one charity, then they sell your name, and 8 other charities or organizations ask for money, and I can't give to them all. So we make a dedicated choice. We're going to give to this charity,
Yep.
Catholic Charities, Catholic Relief, whatever. Uh,
Yeah, because I've gotten that too, like just the mail that piles up in my house, and it's just like, okay, I gave $20 to you about 4 years ago, and I've seen money from you, and I've also seen about 80 of your competitors that are also at my door. and,
yeah,
and I mean, it shows that there is just great need with so many organizations doing work for the common good. And I think it's important that we don't malign the fact that there is just a lot of work that needs to be done. And
right, right.
so, not that you were, not that you were, but for people out there that might think I'm being flippant, like I'm not. I realize there's a ton of work out there, and all the organizations have a different avenue and niche when they're dealing with particular issues of social concern.
Right. And we ought to be very proud of Catholic Charities, Catholic Relief Services. I think they do. I think they do great jobs. Yeah.
How do you educate people in your classroom that might be skeptical of the mission of Catholic Charities or Catholic Relief Services because it aids people other than Catholics?
Yeah. That was the famous line. That was a famous line by a bishop, and I forget his name now, when Catholic Charities was starting, and someone asked him the same question, and he said, uh, uh, "We don't take care of people because they're Catholic. We take care of people because we're Catholic." Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
when I look at the work uh, Mother Teresa did throughout her life, she didn't have a faith check when she picked people off the street. Um, it's just in our history. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's wonderful, and I think it'll help when It helps when faith formation professionalism, especially when I was one. I was always looking for what are the practical examples that I could use for the families I'm serving,
yeah,
for how do I relate Catholic social teaching to them? And even thinking back, because when I asked you the question about the practical ways in which Catholic social teachings affected your work, like it affected my ministry
yeah,
in terms of I really tried to bring home Catholic social teaching and the effects of critical thinking with the populations I was serving, because it is important for me to have that level of engagement. And then Care for Creations really caught my attention, particularly in the last few years as I own my own home and I can now control, all right, I could have this kind of I could not use this kind of plastic in my house. I can get like cloth
Yeah.
paper. I can get cloth paper towels as an alternative. I can look at electric cars because I have a garage I can plug into. I got good credit, so I can get a loan for solar installations. And so it really, those are decisions that Olivia and I both made with that reflective piece of we care about Catholic social teaching and we care about the common good. How can
Yeah.
we best step forward and do that with the space that we have?
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned care for creation. And like other issues, the church has engaged modern questions, and it sees strong arguments and parts to, I'll call them secular responses to modern problems. But in Catholic social teaching, we always see something more, or something a little different, a different spin on it. So for care for creation and Catholic social teaching and Laudato Si especially, we see a realization that the earth creation have always played important parts in Christian and Catholic spirituality. We see creation as literally as a gift from God, right? We see creation as a place for us to link ourselves, be linked with God. The sacraments use, right, things of nature, bread and wine, water. Uh, many many of our great spiritual leaders. Jesus went off to the mountain. He sat by the lake, right? He went into the desert. The nature creation calls for us toward God. How many gardens have Saint Francis in the garden, right? That's purposeful.
Yep.
So that I'm going to call it that, if I can, small s sacramental nature of creation.
Yep.
Where we can come in contact with God. Openings calls us to prayer. I remember years ago, my son, who's now married and has a daughter, we were in the Boundary Waters camping, and we paddled in. And it was raining. It was a terrible day. We paddled in. We set up our camp, and at night, all the clouds disappeared, and the sky was full of stars, and the moon hadn't come up yet, and the lake was flat, so it was like a gazillion stars times a gazillion because they were reflecting the lake. And he looked out and he said, "Dad, there's got to be a God." And I think so, many of us have had the experiences when we see beauty. So that care for creation, that's part of it. And the other thing about Catholic social teaching is that it does not separate care from creation for care for the poor, because we realize that the negative effects of pollution and climate change, et cetera, on the vulnerable populations. We care for future generations through our concern for, but we also care about the people with us now. So I think the Catholic theology on nature is rich and inspiring.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I definitely think Laudato Si was such an important touch point because the Catholic social teaching had implemented a lot of various aspects of care for creation, but had not done a whole systematized work on the idea of caring for God's creation. And so
Right.
Laudato Si was just such a pivotal moment because it puts it all in one spot, and you get an interesting, nuanced, and highly effective reflection.
Yes.
So because Catholic social teaching is such a intense and full topic, what advice do you want to share with faith formation professionals and lay ministry leaders who are looking to incorporate elements of Catholic social teaching in their program?
I think I like to say, well, maybe the things that attracted me to it. One, in that it's practical, that it is applying your faith when you walk out the door, right? And applying your faith to tough situations. in relationships that might not be going well, or conflict, or friendships, and workplaces, and school. I'd say that I see it like in this balance, right? So it's this faith in real life. It's also definitely looking at action and doing things, but there's also this contemplative. Many of the encyclicals end with a prayer. Uh, it's purposeful. The My favorite story in scripture is the Good Samaritan, and go and do likewise. And then it's followed by the story of Mary and Martha right afterwards. And I think Luke put them there on purpose, where the one who chose a better path is in the first story is helping someone else out, and the one who chose a better path in the second story is sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening and contemplating. Right. So I think those two go together. As you said, critical thinking and encouraging people to think about the situation. And I think also the affective, the feeling part of it. One of my constant missions is telling people that, yeah, Catholic social teaching has this principle, the dignity of others, but it's not simply a principle. We're supposed to, and this is Pope Francis is I'm stealing from him.
Yep.
We're supposed to encounter the other. We're supposed to encounter the dignity of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And he has some nice, stories about this, and we've seen this. And actually, this theme of encountering the other is the theme of our last three popes. A big and important idea in John Paul II was solidarity. Solidarity with others. Benedict had two encyclicals, social encyclicals, that talk about love. And then Pope Francis about encountering people. So what I'm saying here is the intellect, thinking things through, but also not divorced from the caring, the mercy, the love, the affective. And that's usually done through some kind of relationships. So that's kind of my grid here, I guess, and plug into how hopefully that might be helpful to someone trying to communicate.
Yeah. And I think as I'm thinking about this as somebody that's practiced faith formation before, is that there's really a couple things that stand out. One is the encountering. I do think that it is possible to build encounters, even if it's just trying to understand the various people that come to your program about who they are, where they're from, what their experience is, and how they see God in their particular experience. I think that's just a vital aspect of engaging with Catholic social thought. And then how do we reach out to our neighbors that are in our communities with various nonprofits that we have that are doing work to serve the poor? What are we engaging with Catholic social teaching through like Catholic Campaign for Human Development or Catholic Relief Services? We've got strong possibilities for engagement with various actions that are going on diocesan-wide, regionally, and nationally.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is, where do you fit Catholic social teaching in the schedule? Because it's not something that necessarily comes with a curriculum, with a ready-made idea of how to just do it, how to just do Catholic social teaching consistently.
Yeah.
But in my own experience, simulations have actually worked rather well too. Is that if you don't have the capacity to encounter others in your program, your youth or adults have encountered people, have encountered situations. So calling that muscle memory, and particularly it was useful for youth. And as I explained it to them, is like, I would rather you practice how to make a moral decision in a simulated setting where you have room for discussion and to learn from your decision, rather than have to make a hard decision in real life and not know and feel overwhelmed and not know what to do.
Right.
So I see Catholic social teaching as a very great set of tools like when we're thinking about the principles, solidarity. All right, well, that's a nice overarching principle to talk about. Just our disposition. That's really key for me, is just what is the disposition that we are imparting to our people. And Catholic social teaching, I think, is great grounds for just a positive, life affirming grounding
Right.
in building for the common good and
Yeah.
God's presence among the common good.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are so many resources today to do that. Um, uh, all the organizations you mentioned have people in education now and outreach that you yourself work with, I think.
Yep.
Uh, and they're happy to meet people and go to parishes. And there's lists of there's books, there's videos, there's movies, all of which can kind of start the conversation. Yeah.
All right. So, another question for you. How are the principles of Catholic social teaching directly related to our call to discipleship? Because a very common word of usage in our archdiocese is making intentional disciples. How is Catholic social teaching directly related to our call to discipleship?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I remember it's in my desk somewhere, an article uh, by David Brooks, and it was in the Atlantic, I think it was, and he was talking about he's Protestant. And he was talking about the Protestant churches in relationship to society and the social order, and he made some comment like, "Well, the Catholics have this. If only we had this." And he was talking about Catholic social teaching.
Right.
It is distinctively Catholic, formed by Catholics, but as part of our, I'm going to call it, and this is what it links to, part of our natural law tradition, we have historically described moral issues in non-theological terms, try to communicate, because we think, as part of this natural law thinking, that if you reflect on the human person and the human condition, you will come up with these ideas yourself almost, right? That they are part of the human. God created all of us and we have all this within us. So we can communicate these ideas and not have to be quoting scripture. We could, we could quote the Sermon on the Mount, right?
Yep.
So this is a distinctive part of Catholicism and living our faith as a Catholic, but it's distinctive, but not isolating or not like enclosed in on itself. It's open, and it realizes that we can talk and be accessible and understandable to others. Part of our discipleship, and I mentioned contemplation and prayer already, and action. What did Jesus do? You know, he taught people, right? He fed a lot of people. He healed people. He was concerned about their wholeness, their well-being in the whole sense. It's part of being a Catholic. Part of our sense of discipleship is being persons for others, caring for others. One of my favorite parts of Thomas Aquinas is he's comparing the corporal works of mercy versus the spiritual works of mercy, right? And the one has to do with caring for others and feeding others, and the other has to do with what we might call more religious, taking care of people, right? And that sense. And I can imagine as he's trying to teach young priests or people in seminary, the debates among them. Which is more important to do, right? Feed people or pray for people, right? And which is more important to do? And he's great because he says, well, generally speaking, the spiritual works are better. Let's just, because that's, but that's not his final answer. He talks about the importance of the corporal works of mercy, taking care of people, will have spiritual effects. And of course, he says it's more important to feed a starving person than, right, like Mother Teresa, than to pray for them. So it's part of Christians and Catholics from day one have done this sort of stuff. Read Acts of the Apostles, right? Read the history of our religious orders. They are contemplative, but many of them were found to do certain sorts of works: educate people, care for orphans, care for sick, care for homeless, right? It's just part of the Catholic tradition, and it always will be.
Yeah. What are your hopes and fears for the Catholic Church as you think about Catholic social teaching, its implementation, and the behaviors you've seen in your students, and what they're bringing to the table of Catholicism?
Well, we're in quite the time now. Putting COVID aside and what's going to happen post-COVID, that's a tough question, because we are facing Catholics and other religious groups are facing a lot of challenges and difficulties. Organized religion is facing a lot of challenges and difficulties in the United States and around the world. So years ago, I taught this January course they call them pre-seminarians, men who have graduated from college, but are now taking prerequisites to join the seminary. Most of them are philosophy classes, right, to get up to what the bishops require for ordination. And this course I taught it with two other people, and each of us had a week. And I did Catholic social teaching, and someone did history of the church, and someone did the sacramental nature of the church. And it was kind of a intro to Catholicism, if you will, concentrated intro to Catholicism. And that idea, whoever designed that course, really captured my imagination, because this is a long answer to your question, Adam.
Yeah.
Because I think philosopher Chesterton said something like, the church is like a cathedral. It has 1,000 doors. People come in through different doors. And that course had these three, I'm going to say, hooks. Why do people like being a Catholic? Why do they love Catholicism? Well, it's the history, the richness of the tradition. It's the sacramental life. It's the prayer life. It's at that crossroads of bringing faith into the real world. It's the social teaching. So I that is to say, I think I'm going to use the word hooks. Maybe there's a better word, but what brings people in and keeps them there and affirms them in their faith. And I think there are 1,000 doors into the church, and one of them is Catholic social teaching, and they see the words of Jesus, they see the gospel trying to be played out today. And I think hopefully that's my hook for students.
Well, and I think it's an important hook, given the amount that Gen Z and millennials care about Catholic social or care about social justice as a whole, particularly looking at issues of racial justice and economic justice. But
yeah,
Catholic social teaching has a lot of positive things to say about racial and economic justice.
It has a lot to say about racial justice. I'm not going to say that all the church has been a great actor on it. I had the great fortune to go to Rome several times. I've taught classes in Rome, and when you wander around Rome and the Vatican, you see people from literally all over the world. And they're all, and Catholic, the church is a global, literally a global institution. We have, and I don't think an individual parish might realize how global the world is, and that we're all Catholics. But it's teaching on race and racism. The bishops put out a couple of I think a year and a half ago. The bishops put another document on racism, and a bishop of El Paso, Texas, put out a pastoral letter on racism that are good and strong. I think we have something to offer the conversation
Yeah.
in America right now. I think obviously more can be done with that, and should be done. But
Right. And I think my hopes are that, especially for the youth and the young adults, is that we have a lot in our Catholic tradition to offer in terms of any issue of substance that they would care, that a young person would care about.
yeah,
My fear is that our own failings will be our own shot in the foot in terms of like actually doing effective outreach. And that's a hard hurdle to climb.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I how often do you have to engage that in your like undergraduate theology freshman courses as as students are stepping out from being under their parents' influence and thinking about how they want to or don't want to be a Catholic? How does that discussion come up in your coursework? How do you like?
Yeah, it does. And students come from, as you can imagine, all over the spectrum. Um, the 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 biggest thing that I found over all these years is, and this goes back to your question about teaching Catholic social teaching or teaching any topic to young people versus adults, is that they would have they would have in their hearts and minds a less complex view of the church and its teaching, and then and the Bible and everything, and then the encouragement to read this and think about this. Oh, I've never thought about it this way. I've heard, or I've never heard this, and not in a bad sense, but like
Yeah.
just, oh, I haven't didn't hear this and before today, and I just had that last week in class where a student
Oh,
said that. I mean, it's obviously one of the joys of teaching. Yeah,
great. Yeah, and it's like I think we all have our part to play in creating those aha moments, those moments of wonder where we find that piece that helps click in someone's mind about the goodness of our own Catholic faith. I mean, particularly in our case, since we both are well versed in Catholic social teaching, I think that is a unique moment where people see, hey, we actually have something to say about what is going on in the world.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it's not just a list of no, I can't do X, Y, or Z behavior. It's really a method of discernment for how we solve larger, complex societal problems, which I think is news for a lot of youth.
yeah,
For a lot of youth engaging in that want to engage in social action and that they find support in their Catholic faith. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. And another issue that has come up is interreligious dialogue, and the church has been doing this since Vatican II, right? We have look where the popes have gone recently, right? And uh, what we know from this and learn from this is, you don't have to give up your own faith when you're having a conversation with someone from another faith. You're not giving up anything that you believe
yeah,
when you're trying to listen to them. And I think that was a concern of some people earlier on that you gotta, no, I mean, you don't.
No.
And they'll probably respect you more for it, that you are, you know, listening,
Yeah.
trying to find areas of agreement, trying to understand misunderstandings, and being clear about what we don't agree on. Um, and the church has been a leader in that.
Yeah. It's true in a time of polemic and extreme polarization in the world and in the Catholic Church. We definitely have examples going back to Vatican II of we've actually done dialogue, authentic dialogue, where we have embraced we've embraced the goodness in others, and we obviously have kept our own identities,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we don't have disrespect for people who are different than us.
right, right.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share for our faith formation professionals as we're closing up here?
Well, other than thank you for your work, and keep up the good work. Um, I This was a fun conversation, Adam, and
Yep.
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. This is a great conversation, and when we can be back in person for in-person events, we will be glad to have you come lead an event for us, give us kind of a fuller introduction to Catholic social teaching, and help us think about how we can best implement Catholic social teaching as a part of our faith formation practice. Dr. Bernard Brady, we want to thank you for your time today and for this for our Center for Mission web series. We will see you all soon.
Thank you.